crafting this story, we're talking about these women, and we're not talking about their contradictions of being colonized. And there's no, analysis of the fact that that uprising was an anti-colonial uprising against the police. And I just want to say, I hear a lot like all cops are bad, and like that, and I understand the good intentions behind that. But we have to understand that it's not just that they're bad as if it's like some kind of moral question, but they are a force of colonial domination. The police is a militarized force of colonialism. And they're there to protect and defend the stolen loot and stolen property acquired by us. So they're doing it in our name as white people. And many gay-friendly cops are being celebrated during Pride, and you can see this. And it's not just co-option that we've participated in, but we've been willful participants in the real genocide of African people. Like I mentioned, gentrification. Gentrification is genocidal. It means drugs in the community. It means police containment. It means losing their resources. Houses that have been in black families, for centuries and centuries, or decades and decades, are being, stolen from underneath their noses. Those are genocidal tactics, again, to keep the African nation separated. And we as, white queer people and trans people are often the first, we move to the hood because it's cheap and it's cool, and, we start raving the rainbow flag. Well, the rainbow flag has come to represent gentrification and the first sign of, the fact that police containment is going to start happening. And there, this is, if you see has anybody seen the documentary Flag Wars? You should see it. It describes more about this fight of what the rainbow flag really means to the black community. And I just also want to mention that, there was a recent case, I think last year, of this white lesbian couple that lived in Portland, Oregon, where I live, and they had adopted like 6 African children who were stolen African children. And, you might remember them, Dante was one of their kids that was like shoved into this photo op to hug a cop while he was crying. And it went viral after post-Ferguson Rebellion. And so they were kind of just like using this child as, this liberal photo op. And then, a couple of years later, it turns out that Dante and his, 5 brothers and sisters were being starved to death. They were being abused. And that eventually ended in, the terrible death of their family driving them off of a cliff and murdering all of them. And then, Ed Buck was a gay political activist who picked up black men in bars and then murdered them. So before this, happened, we, as the white LGBTQ people, were heralding them as some kind of progressive, people in our community, and they ended up being, actually, physically taking African lives. And just because we're gender sexually nonconforming doesn't mean that we get a free pass to not examine that, we have many past and present crimes that we've committed against African and Indigenous people. Next slide, please. So, as the system stands, our rights have to come at the expense of most of humanity. And as the chairman states, as white people, we sit on the pedestal of oppression. But just because we sit on the pedestal of oppression doesn't mean that we don't feel the, effects of colonialism and the pain. And, us as LGBTQIA people, we struggle with depression, and, we have this emptiness sometimes that we can feel as white people because of our own self-imposed isolation. And, that drives us to addiction and suicide. We're not accepted by our families, and we're not allowed to express ourselves fully who we are at work. And, white ruling class is gaining more and more resources and kicking us. We gentrify the neighborhood and then we get kicked out. And, a high-rise goes up in our neighborhood and things like that. And that basically saying that all of these things that we experience is because of white power. It's because of colonialism. So even on the, on the pedestal of oppression, we still experience some of that. And this is just a picture of Brandon, Tina, and Matthew Shepard, who were assaulted, very violently assaulted, and died because of being trans or gay. And again, who's at fault? White power. But you see how their stories gained, so much support and attention. They had documentaries, made. movies made. You know, the families received so much support and so many resources, but that's because their families were white and they had those resources and that support from the white community. And so much African and indigenous death goes unnoticed, and business as usual, you know. And so we have to understand our oppression in the context of white power. You know, that is what we have to do. And next slide. So this is just a little example of, you know, our common enemy being colonialism, and that homophobia and transphobia is because of colonialism. It was spread throughout the world by colonialism, by white power, and that, and so we have to understand that, you know, all of these things that happen in the white community is because of white power and colonialism, which is why we say, you know, we're not just doing this to be nice to black people. It's actually in our interest. It's actually going to see the real liberation of us, even as white LGBTQIA people. And that's why we have to join underneath the leadership of the African working class and fight this thing. And next slide. So the chairman says the white population must become anti-colonialist as a matter of self-defense. We must unite with colonized people all over the world, like I said, not as charity or a do-gooder thing, but because our fate is tied to it. We have to decenter ourselves and our problems under capitalism, because we do experience those problems, like I said. It's not that we don't, but we have to see through the eyes of the colonized, which is what African internationalism does for us, and see that it is in our interest to unite with black power. Next slide. So we don't want gay or trans imperialism, we want no imperialism. So any, you know, gay presidential candidate from the Democratic Party should not get our support. That is just a, you know, that's luring us, that's tricking us into thinking that we've gained something. And, you know, or trying to be in the military, this fight right now that's happening, like, we shouldn't want to be in the military. Right. We shouldn't want to fight, that is using us to fight the white ruling class's fight. We shouldn't want to go to Palestine and or kill Arab children, or you know, all of those things. That we shouldn't be tricked by this, and we know that it's not in our interest. And you know, the African People's Socialist Party is leading this front of liberating the world from parasitic capitalism, from colonialism. And if you unite with, you know, being against the bombings of Yemen and the killing of children in Palestine and the concentration camps that are now at the border and the concentration camps of the indigenous people that we call reservations, you know, if you're against all of that, and you need to join Uhuru Solidarity Movement. And if this is the movement where we as white people, even as us as white LGBTQIA people, as working class white people, as, you know, white people with disabilities, as white women, as white trans people, this is our movement this is the movement that's going to liberate us. It's under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. And it is because the African People's Socialist Party is the front of the African working class, the most dehumanized, the most slandered, the most oppressed sector of the human population is African workers. And they will win their freedom, and they will take everyone with them who is on their side. So this is really us this is the party and us under their leadership drawing the line. You know, you can be the white opportunist or you can be the revolutionary cadre. And so, yeah, I just want to say, join me in uniting and taking down white power by paying reparations, joining the revolution, getting organized, and under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, who is not stopping till it's won. Uhuru to Africa and African people, and I'm going to say unity through, you're going to say reparations, unity through.
Reparations!
Unity through.
Reparations!
Unity through.
Reparations!
Uhuru!
Uhuru!
Feel free to clap longer and louder for Matt. It's quiet. Thank you to our comrades for coming up from Portland to bring that brilliant message. So many things that you said that I'm sure everybody could spend another hour or two researching and learning more about, but also learning about how we can combat it. Spoiler alert, reparations. There's just one thing that you said in there that I really want to expound on real quick, is you said gentrification, talking about flag wars, in the context of flag wars, gentrification is genocide. We don't take that lightly, that gentrification is genocide. And people will hear that and think that we're just trying to be sensational or inflammatory or something like that. It's genuine that gentrification is genocide, and it's 3 tiers of genocide. The first tier is just the theft of Duwamish land first and foremost. We are on occupied Duwamish territory, Coast Salish territory. Never were we invited, right? Never have we been given a pass to sleep here. Matter of fact, if you go just across the bridge over there to White Center, you'll see the vast majority of Native people sleeping under that White Center Plaza awning are indigenous, Native people. This is their home, but they're homeless in their own home. And if they're out on a reservation, like Matt said, it's a concentration camp. So that's one layer of genocide, stealing this from the Duwamish in the present day, stealing this from all indigenous people in the present day, whether they speak Lakota or Spanish, the party always says. It doesn't matter, stealing this territory. Number 2, the redlining that took place to force African people into all of these communities that are now being stolen, where that rainbow flag will wave to symbol gentrification is on its way, police containment's on its way. That redlining was genocide in and of itself, but then these folks made it a desirable place to be. African people find a way to make the worst parts of the food that they were given as scraps during chattel slavery, made it the best tasting food you could imagine, right? They found a way to make the places where the trash man wouldn't stop, where all the industrial waste was being poured into the air, where the water was unusable. They found a way to make that so appealing that white people would want to come steal that again. In these little places they were contained. But when that happened, guess what we did? We destroyed community. We continued to destroy the communities that were built, the reliance that African people had on each other and their neighbors, the little tiny piece of wealth they might have been able to garner from having a house there for multiple generations. And then we mixed up gangs and put them into the slum burbs, and people died and are continuing to die, whether it's through starvation, whether it's through horizontal violence that takes place after we forcibly corral people around. And what's the third layer of genocide? It's what built Seattle's tech empire, what built Seattle's military-industrial complex. It is the ongoing genocide of the peoples of the Congo. If you know the history of the Congo, you know about Patrice Lumumba, you might know that the Congo has almost every resource known to humanity contained in there at massive quantities. In particular, cobalt and coltan. None of these drones work without cobalt and coltan. None of these phones work without cobalt and coltan. None of this technology, this tech empire, or this Boeing military-industrial complex empire exists without the genocide of the Congo. 10 million people over the past 10 years. And guess who has made sure that our economic interests in the colonizer nation are protected there? AFRICOM, the very same military that we are trying to, it's not just where hot war is going down. It's not just in Syria. It's not just in Iraq and Afghanistan. It is taking place in Congo. Did you know we were at war with the Congo? Did anybody know that? That's never been announced to me. Well, 4 branches of the United States government are there, and that's what the white LGBTQIA movement is trying to push folks into, is to say, we want acceptance, we want validation, we want to be able to join into this imperialist movement. And what Mads just said so beautifully, what the party teaches us is, no, we have no interest in joining this disgusting parasitic empire. We have absolutely no interest on a moral level, of course, but in terms of what Chairman just said, as a matter of self-defense, because the oppressed peoples of the world are sick and tired of white power trying to suffocate them, and they're ready to take their shit back. And they're doing it. And somebody who really embodies that is someone who we're able to hear from next, a profound speaker. Before I do that, I want to give a quick salute to Comrade Demetrius, who wasn't here when I was saluting earlier, and a salute to Comrade Marissa Martinez, both members of NPDUM, the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement here in Seattle, which recognizes that Africans must lead. Marissa is indigenous by way of her Mexican national identity, and she understands that all colonized peoples, she's taken this historic stance that all colonized peoples' fate is under the leadership of the African working class. A major salute to you, Marissa. Extremely big salute to you, Demetrius. And then let me bring it back to our featured speaker here tonight. So this particular person, we had the privilege of hearing him speak a few months ago over in South Park at the All Diamonds or Blood Diamonds speaking tour. And that's another one of those finite resources being extracted from all over Congo. But we had the privilege to hear them speak a few months ago, and we're so thrilled that they would be able to come back here, because you've heard maybe us mention St. Petersburg, Florida. I started mentioning that reparations ticket that was run 2 years ago. By the way, there's another one being run right now. Akile Anai, Director of Agitprop for APSP, is running for City Council, and so is Ann Hirsch, the Southern Regional Coordinator of the Hulu Solidarity Movement. They will win on a reparations platform in St. Petersburg, Florida, and that will be the model city for what reparations can do at a local municipal level. While something like the Black Power Blueprint, which you're going to hear more about in St. Louis and Ferguson, that is led by those who were in the Ferguson Rebellion, that some folks have forgotten about, sparked this renewed interest in revolution 5 years ago. So you're going to hear about that. But Comrade Israel Finn is working here on the West Coast to build a One Africa, One Nation marketplace, global marketplace. They are the lead organizer of the African People's Socialist Party in Portland. They work directly with Deputy Chair Onizene Yeshitela and are the Economic Development Coordinator for the Western region of the African People's Socialist Party. Phenomenal speaker, phenomenal revolutionary, one of the people that will lead us out of this disgusting mess that we, the colonizer, have created. So without further ado, join me in welcoming Comrade Israel Finn.
Uhuru! Uhuru!
Uhuru!
All right. I just want to thank everyone for being here today, this dynamic event. I also want to thank you for having me again. As Jesse said, I was here a couple months ago for the All Diamonds, our Blood Diamonds tour. A special salute to my comrade Mads for that dynamic presentation from the Solidarity Movement. And also a salute to, what do you call it? Spoke-Addle? Is that what it is? Spoke-Addle, Spokane and Seattle Solidarity for organizing this event. Of course, I want to have a salute to my leadership, Chairman Amalia Yeshitela, for the theory of African internationalism, which we've spoken on a lot today, for which I would not be here speaking to you without this incredible scientific theory brought to you to directly talk about the way forward for the African working class, and who solved the question of same-gender loving people within the movement and staying steadfast on the stance for liberating Africans and all oppressed people, regardless of their specialized oppressed class, including gender, sexuality, disability, etc. I do want to salute my direct leadership, Deputy Chair Onizene Yeshitela, for leading the economic work of the party through her office, for which I am under the leadership of. Next slide, please. I'm kind of here today, I'm an African who also identifies as queer, who also identifies as gender non-conforming. And during this month of June, where we are supposed to be celebrating some kind of identity pride with those things, I kind of asked myself, like, what are we really celebrating? What is there really to celebrate? We're in an era of the crisis of imperialism, and we see that evidence day by day, every day. We're seeing the effects, like Mads mentioned, of gentrification, which both Mads and Jesse talked about how gentrification is merely just the genocide of domestic African colonies to further white wealth. We look at the state-sanctioned violence and murder of black men, women, and children, which is just a modern-day lynching of the police state. We have the preschool to prison pipelines, drug epidemics, failing healthcare systems, and yet queer communities nationwide are being won to the pacification of the gay agenda. White LGBTQIA+ people are being lulled into this false sense of hope that if they somehow obtain equal rights with their oppressor, that their liberation will be won. But at whose expense? The imperialist colonizers are losing their stranglehold on society. It wants to maintain that stranglehold, and it must solve the contradictions that it has with the queer community in order to unite the empire. And queers are being succumbed to that every day, that bait. This is why we talk about gay rights now and not gay liberation. It's because they need to unite the empire, and they're using you.
Yep.
They're asking you to give up solidarity with your colonized brothers and sisters to maintain your own status, and yet that status is still allocated by the state. You will never be free. Next slide. So much like in the 1960s, like we've said, the main trend on the main agenda was revolution. White leftist opportunists co-opted the narrative of Marsha P. Johnson, a revolutionary, who fought in the Stonewall riots, and they called it the gay liberation. But the gay liberation didn't exist until that day occurred. What Marsha P. Johnson was doing was enacting revolutionary practice of Black power. And then, it was the LGBTQIA, white LGBTQIA people who stole that momentum and selectively took out the struggle for revolution, right? So, we don't want to continue to co-opt this movement. We want to talk about the parasiticism of queer culture. And this has been the position of queer movements as well as queer culture. Queer culture has been the conduit between Black invention, African invention, and mainstream pop culture. We look at Paris is Burning, which was a documentary about Black and brown queer and trans women in the 1980s and 1990s who were utilizing drag and ball culture as their own practice for economic self-reliance. They used this as another form outside of sex work to create their own economy so that they could survive, so that they could eat, clothe, and house themselves. And they created wealth and value out of nothing, out of fashion, out of artistry. And instead, this white woman went in and told their story and gained all the material wealth from that story. Where these same, queer and Black and brown queer and trans women, many of them still died on the streets, while their story is still being glorified, through Netflix. The same is happening today with the FX show Pose, that everybody is really excited about because it gives Black and brown trans women visibility. And as much as that's important and we want to just crawl on the floor for those breadcrumbs of visibility, it doesn't have anything to do with the material conditions of the African working class and the queer and trans brown and Black women that are a part of that are impoverished within that system. And yet it's a white cis gay man who is the producer of that show who's making all the money. And so what good is your visibility if you're not getting it back? And these are the resources, directly and indirectly, that have been looted and stolen, not just from the continent of Africa, but from the African community and the contributions that they've made to the world. We are the creators of all of the wealth and value in the world. It's been off of our backs that we have the world we live in today, that white, queer, LGBTQIA people can be cops and CEOs and, align with the oppressor. And so it's not just through, artistic expression that these communities have created, the ball culture and dance hall and all of these things. Go to the next slide. But, Madonna, next slide. Madonna, who we all know, for that infamous song Vogue, she didn't invent voguing, she didn't create voguing. In fact, she was taught by, the Harlem ball culture. And yet still when asked to have backup dancers from that culture for this momentous video, there's been reports that she didn't even treat them well, that they were in lawsuits with her because, she didn't respect the artistry from which she's, making money. And this was the best-selling single of 1990. She sold over 6 million copies. And we see today sort of the resurgence of Vogue culture and the people that are, gaining wealth off of this, art form, are white people. They're learning from Black and brown people and getting paid, taking it outside of the community and getting paid. It's actually, a class you can take at Juilliard now, right? Wow. And so this comes off of the backs of Black and brown people who created this culture to survive in the first place. Next slide. So, I think that it can kind of get off track, this conversation about the appropriation of Black and brown culture. I don't really care if you are going into work and saying, hey Susan, hey girl, hey, and Z snapping and back. You can do that all you want. It's about selectively taking from the Black community and not putting back into the Black community from which you take. So you can't take our culture and then not join us in revolution. You can't say, hey, slay, and then turn around and not unite with us about feeding and clothing and housing ourselves. Right? And so it might be a cute joke, and Katy Perry might be able to, say this on national television, but we want to say that solidarity is more than well wishes. I saw recently on the gram, they have this whole thing talking about Marsha P. Johnson, how she was a black trans woman, and all of these things, and if you don't support her, then you're about rainbow capitalism, which I'm not really sure how they made that connection, but, supporting black trans women isn't just saying, I support black trans women. It's material solidarity. We're talking about actually changing the material conditions of our people, including the most oppressed sectors within the African nation. Next slide. So yeah, queer resistance hasn't lost its origin story. It never fully appreciated it to begin with. It's rooted in black power and revolution, and it's liberalism that has taken away as the main form of queer resistance and has stifled the blaring horns of revolution, especially from African leadership. So when you go to pride parades and you see signs like this that say, love wins, it's really not love that is oppressing us. It's not our ability to love other people or to be outside of the gender binary that is oppressing us. It is, an economic system, an economic social system that relies on the systematic exploitation of the working class that creates this oppression. And so without that analysis, we will never be free, we will never be liberated. Love will not get you anything unless you're here for revolution. Next slide. So we're here to put revolution back on the agenda. Right? Okay, yeah. We're here to put revolution back on the agenda. It is the responsibility of the African People's Socialist Party to get African internationalism, out into the world. It's kind of a part of this tour too, to change the narrative of African people worldwide and how LGBTQIA white people play a role in that revolution. It's the struggle of the African People's Socialist Party to liberate and unite Africans, and it's the solution for every problem faced by the African nation, and consequently all other oppressed people of the world. Our problem, like Mads mentioned, is parasitic capitalism and colonial domination. You hear a lot about, Africans, same-gender loving Africans in this country, but a lot of people say to me, well, what about the black community? They don't like gay people. And what about Africa? They're against gays. They're killing gays. Well, it's not the African nation that built the rhetoric against gay people. The African nation has never had a problem with gay people, with trans people. We didn't call it trans then, we probably had our own word. But you know what I mean? It was the African nation that embraced and celebrated matriarchies and all of these things that